This podcast accompanies the acclaimed new docuseries In the Eye of the Storm, which follows the remarkable journey of maverick economist, politician and whistleblower Yanis Varoufakis. Both the series and podcast explore the connections between power, democracy, capitalism and the deepening crises of civilization. The series is available to watch now. Details in the description. Enjoy the conversation.
I've always been fascinated by the idea of the lottery of birth and just how our biological and cultural influences determine so much about our path and who we are, the way we see the world. So when you look back, what were the major factors which have shaped your worldview?
Well, I grew up in the 70s in Leith, which is the kind of the port area of Edinburgh, like kind of the Piraeus of the north, basically. And it was like, it was dominated by the shipbuilding, Rob Caledon. It was dominated by the docks. All my family were dockers, um, and also the merchant fleet, So it was a very kind of industrial sort of old school industrial background, and both my parents were trade unionists. My mother was very kind of communist leaning in her politics. My dad was more of a social democrat, so they used to have these kind of big arguments, and all his, the family were all trade unionists and very political. The neighbours seemed to all be very kind of into politics, and it was a time of the first miners' strike and the blackouts with Heath and all that, growing up in that era. And I remember all the sort of anger and the kind of resentment against the Conservatives, and the idea that the idea that the industrial working classes then, that were very confident in the post-war settlement, and there was a sense that of entitlement that nothing but the best for us, and we're going for it, and we have no fear of the establishment and the ruling classes, and there was a militancy. And and when I left school, I became an apprentice TV mechanic fixing televisions, and I was, obviously I was right into the union, and I was the steward for the young apprentices. So I was basically kind of brought up into all that. And when I moved to London, the punk thing was happening, and I got involved in Workers Against Racism and the Anti-Nazi League and all the offshoots of punk. It was a very kind of loud, vocal, political, kind of high energy time, and basically I watched all that sort of vanish, kind of, and be kind of beaten back by the sort of Thatcherite kind of Reagan sort of kind of the basic ascendancy of neoliberalism, which we've never recovered from, which has kind of tightened its grip and has become much more kind of hegemonic and dominant, and taking us right on to your thesis, Yanis, of cloud capital and the dominance of the dominance of techno-feudalism as the new system, the new political, economic, and social system that we're moving into. Far from the kind of the utopian ambitions of that generation of people, we're kind of moving into something that seems to be kind of very it seems to be something fundamentally kind of undemocratic and regressive about it for humanity, and it's a very key time to be a human being. It's a great time to be a writer. It's maybe not such a good time to be a human being, but I just feel very grateful that I managed to live through an era where people were more politicized and where the working class was more militant and more had a greater sense of what the possibilities for humanity were.
You just reminded me, possibly because of your accent as well, the combination of your accent and your story. I arrived in Britain in 1978, in the middle of 1978, and I was very quickly caught up in the industrial strikes that preceded the winter of discontent. And the NUM, the National Union of Mine Workers, was, for some reason, it was an organization that I got involved in. And there was I'm sure you will remember him, was a certain gentleman that, for some
You're going
accidental
to see
reason, took me under
McGachy,
his
aren't you?
wing and taught me Mick McGachy. And I
Yeah.
spent quite some time with him. Firstly, it took me a while for me to be able to understand what he was saying because of his very heavy accent, my being
He
Greek,
had a
right?
very heavy accent, but he also had a very gravelly voice as well on top of that. So he had a voice like that, but it's very strident and very gravelly.
He did, and then I got involved in the steelworkers strike. If you remember, that was in England mostly, and then of
Yep.
course it was, I spent 11 years alongside with you in a very long sequence of defeats. The greatest one, of course, was the 1984 miners' strike, but it wasn't just the Wapping dispute, as they called it, Rupert Murdoch's systematic annihilation of the trades unions movement in the printing presses, in the printing industry. That's how I cut my political teeth. Can I ask you, I'm just very curious about your views on Scotland, because I have a very soft spot for Scotland. I spent some time teaching at the University of Glasgow, and I remember the exasperation of progressives with the Thatcherite turn of England, which was not reciprocated in Scotland to the same extent, thus creating the rift between England and Scotland, leading to the rise of the SNP. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was, I mean, obviously, because I moved to England in my teens, and I was always very kind of down on the idea of Scottish independence, in that very traditional way that you can't split up the British working class. I have more in common with someone from Liverpool or East London than I do from a kind of posh part of Scotland, for example. And then it's like you notice that you take into account the reality of it, and you take into account the impact that imperialist kind of delusion and grandeur has on the British state, and how it kind of it poisons the psyche of the working classes in Britain and Scotland and in England, and also you think about smaller units of government, and a friend of mine, Evelyn Gillen, who is very against independence, said that you want to be able to look these politicians in the eyes, and you want to be able to see the whites of their eyes. And for better or worse, the Scottish Parliament, I mean, it is just a glorified local council. It doesn't have any real power in the grand scheme of things. But you can actually see the politicians walking to work or sitting in a cafe. You go to Westminster, and the security around it is crazy, and it's probably going to get even more crazy now because of this nonsense with the Hoyle and the speaker, basically. That and the idea that our politicians are kind of under threat from kind of placard waving grannies. Sort of. When people are literally being incinerated in Gaza, the whole British press, it's a tragedy of this guy who's kind of might have been bullied by Keir Starmer or pressurized by Keir Starmer. It's absolute nonsense. But I think the closer you are to your representatives, the better it is. And I wanted, I didn't just want independence for Scotland or for Wales or for Cornwall. I thought that England should be broken up. I thought that we should have city states in England. We should have devolved government as much as possible. So I think that to me the big winner, the big idea of it was if you got rid of if you got Scottish independence, you've got rid of the public schools, you've got rid of the House of Lords, you've got rid of the monarchy, the aristocracy. All that is gone basically, and that was a real fear. That's why so many people in the establishment in Britain were against Scottish independence. They don't give a toss about Scotland, but they believe that if the Scots make a go of this, England are going to start saying, well, we'll have some of that. We don't really need the City of London or the royal family or the public schools, Eton and all that kind of stuff. We'll have some of that. Once they've had their cut, there's not a lot left on the table for anybody else. So let's have some of that ourselves. And that was a big fear, I think. That was why it was so the reaction of it was so over the top and visceral and histrionic in terms of and it was all this the British establishment and all their kind of lackeys went into this kind of unseemly kind of bully victim mode. It's like, please stay with us, Scotland, and then the threats if we don't stay with us and all that, and then please stay with us again. It was just nonsense again. So I became quite a support, a kind of vocal supporter of Scottish independence.
Yeah, I had the same evolution. I was dead against it when I lived there at first. But then the Tony Blair devolution, what it did was, in a way, toxified England, because the Scots got their parliament, which is not so toothless. Come to think of it, universities are much better in Scotland than they are in England because of the Scottish Parliament's refusal to treat them like, money-making enterprises like the English universities were. The NHS is better funded in Scotland than it is in England.
Yeah, I mean they have tried in their own way to keep some kind of social democratic flame burning with the limited resources that they do have, and that's been a kind of
Indeed.
and again, my argument's always been if they had more resources, they would do more of this kind of thing. It seems a bit piecemeal now, but if they had more resources, if they had a kind of a stronger kind of parliament with real tax raising powers, and I mean tax raising powers in not paying tax in Westminster to build missiles to fire at kids in Gaza, basically. So if we were spending that on schools and hospitals and education, that would be, to me, that would be a kind of the advancement of independence.
Yeah, and it's something you said about devolution before, that you would like to see England being split up. Not so much split up, but I mean, if you think about it, the worst off part of the United Kingdom is North England, because not Scotland, North England, because North England is completely disenfranchised. London doesn't give a damn about North England. They talk about the Red Wall and so on, and leveling up, but this is all talk. It's just hot air. The people in London, as Tony Benn once said, look at the north of England in the same way that the British colonial powers looked at India, like a territory to be managed and a population that had to be controlled. So they have no voice, the North English. Whereas, and there's this contrast with Scotland, because Scotland has a lot more voice.
Yes, I mean it's. I think that the kind of the evolution of more devolved powers to cities like Manchester and anything that's been done positively have been done by these local politicians, these mayors. I mean, I think and they've suffered the consequence. I mean, look, the guy in Newcastle, for example, is like just for very has been ostracized for nothing, basically, for going to watch a film. It's crazy. But this urge to control, this centrist urge, this centralized urge to control. I mean, if you look at the Labour Party guy in Scotland, it happens all the time. They'll try to assert their autonomy, and they'll beat their chest, and then the leader of the Labour Party, whoever it is in London, will tell them that this is what they have to do, and they'll fall back into this humiliating sort of scenario where they just fall back into line. And it's like but both the parties, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, are fundamentally centralist parties, and that's the mentality. They're very London orientated.
Yanis, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on the relationship between decentralizing power and internationalism, which I know you're very passionate about, and DM is inherently internationalist, and you co-founded the Progressive International, which is global in its scope. How do we connect these two impulses?
Well, taking my cue from Irvine, if you're a Democrat, you want decentralization, because the only way the demos can have any semblance of control over the affairs that impact their life is if they can, as Irvin put it, look into the eyes, into the whites of the eyes of the decision makers. And that can only happen if you've got local citizens' assemblies or parliaments, call them what you might. In my estimation, it's important to have deliberative processes. Like, the Irish had this magnificent citizens' assembly by which to settle the question of abortion. And to do this at the local level, at the regional level, and at national and transnational level. And if you do that, then suddenly the fuel that powers nationalism and misanthropy and xenophobia simply dissipates. Because if you look at Brexit, for instance, the nationalist Brexit drive, I mean, where did that come from? From the people who were disenfranchised by decades of Thatcherism and complete condensation by, quite a few years of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. They were the ones that created all the discontent, which then found expression. It could have found expression in something else, in pure racism. It found expression in Brexit. I don't think that all that passion to get out of the EU had anything to do with the EU. It had to do with, an elite that had centralized power and had disenfranchised people. So the two go together. If you have decentralization, if you have democratization of decision making, if you have democratization of the economy, of money, right? Because remember that the centralization of power goes hand in hand with the centralization of money creation. It is the City of London that creates all the money. 97% of every Scottish pound was created by some bank in the City of London, not by the state. And of course, those bankers, whether they have Scotland in their name, like the Royal Bank of Scotland or not, they're all City of London and Wall Street based. And they appropriate all the values produced by the little people all over Britain and the world. And when their gambles fall apart, explode, then they ensure that the costs of their gambling are shouldered by the little people who never benefited during the good times from their wages. So that fuels xenophobia and nationalism. The only antidote to xenophobia and nationalism is decentralization of power, democratization of the economic sphere, of money, and of day-to-day decision-making.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that democracy has been undermined, the way that kind of the unions have been destroyed, the way that the Labour Party is kind of being co-opted into a neoliberal agenda. It's there is no outlet other than a kind of a sort of a kind of grumpy, tetchy fascism, basically. I think that the interesting thing about British politics to me, and I think American politics as well, over here, is that people have absolutely no expectation of politicians being anything other than entertainers. So you have the era of the clown like Trump and Johnson. Nobody expects anything serious from them. They're basically there to entertain. They're not there. They're not. People have a realization that the system has failed us. I mean, when as a young guy kind of growing up, I mean, I had, I was terrible at school and left school early, but I walked into an apprenticeship. Then I could go back into, I could pay £1 and do a night school class and get qualifications and get into university. I had all my fees paid at university. I had my rent paid at university. I had a grant, which was about kind of 2/3 of the industrial wage. And I actually had more money than my dad at one point. By the time I got a summer job and worked over the year, yeah, and you got tax rebates from work. You had. I was given all this by the state. And if you look at what the state gives people from my age, from my class, younger people from my social class background now, it meets them purely in a coercive way. It doesn't give them employment. There's no full employment policies. It doesn't give them any education. There's no, there's the area that I grew up in. All the docks have gone. The factories have gone. Like Parsons, Peebles, Ferrantes, they're all gone. So the state meets people in a kind of coercive way, in a patronizing way, in a controlling way. It doesn't offer anything. The only class of people it's offering something to are the very, very rich, a transnational moneyed elite who've rigged the financial system in their favor, and all the money, all the resources are flowing one way. Now, it's like, and this is kind of exacerbated now that as you've written really brilliantly, Yanis, about this move from capitalism as a profit-based kind of market-driven system into this kind of this whole new dimension of control and power over citizens in terms of using their own sort of their own history, and the nostalgia and kind of the sort of the old kind of advertising techniques, but kind of massively kind of amplified. How do you see things kind of what kind of resistance can people have to that? Is the answer to that the Corbyn Labour Party manifesto is one of the things that we can do to because he wanted to nationalize the internet. He wanted to have a free internet for the people. Is that something we should be doing? Should we be looking at how we can remove the privatization of the internet? And should we be doing this for countries? Should countries be saying to multinationals, if you want to operate in our country, here are the rules. If you want to use the internet in our country, here are the rules.
Well, let me remind our viewers that the internet used to be a capitalism-free zone when it was first instituted. The first internet, the original internet in the 1980s and 1990s, for 20 years, was a commons. It belonged to anyone who used it. Today, when you visit a website, at the top you'll see http:// and then the URL, the address. That HTTP is a language. It's a computer language. Somebody wrote it. Didn't get a single penny for it back in the 1990s. Put it out there for people to be able to read each other's web pages, right? It was a commons. It was a gift exchange. Somebody wrote HTTP, somebody else wrote SMTP. You remember SMTP? This is the first four letters that are in your outgoing email. So the reason why we can send email now to one another is because somebody wrote a program for doing that they simply made available to everyone. So it was a commons, and then it was privatized. Like, after the enclosures in the 18th century, Scottish and English and Welsh land was privatized. It was enclosed, and you had the movement towards capitalism. But that privatization of the internet then spawned, and thank you for mentioning my book, Irvine, what I describe as cloud capital, which is it's machinery. It doesn't live in the cloud. It's here on Earth and in the oceans, in the optic fiber cables crisscrossing our oceans. It's real machinery, right? Except that it's the first kind of capital, the first kind of capital good, or machine good, whose purpose is not to produce something else, but to modify our behavior, and to modify it on behalf of the owners of that cloud capital, who then turn us all into a kind of cloud serf, a serf. Whether you are a youngster uploading videos on TikTok. You are adding to the cloud capital of somebody through your own labor, which of course you don't get a penny for. If you are a capitalist, a low-grade capitalist producing a bicycle, right? You sell it over Amazon.com, and Jeff Bezos retains 40% of the price. 40%, that is a huge, extortionary rent. I call it the cloud rent. And so on and so forth. So the idea, the original idea that the left had, the Marxist left had, was the right one. That it's not a matter of simply taxing the profits of the capitalists and redistributing a little bit to the working class. That's gone. That's finished. And it won't help very much. The idea is to reclaim the means of production. And now, of course, it's not just a means of production or distribution and exchange. I used to say, as we used to say, remember Clause 4 that Tony Blair took away from the Labour Party constitution? It's also the means of communication. And the means of communication is not so much the internet, Irvine. It's the algorithms that operate on the internet in order to modify our behavior and turn capitalism into a form of digital feudalism. I call it techno-feudalism, which, compared to capitalism, which was a bad enough system, right? Capitalism always produced crisis, it produced wasted generations, unemployment, inequality, and all that. Techno-feudalism turbocharges all that, makes the capitalists of crisis look like a walk in the park. It makes the mind control.
But the ultimate goal of this kind of control, and it has, it is moving from kind of consumerism to control, because it's less interested in profit now, because it knows that the consumer base, that is going to continue to be eroded. People, because the money is all going one way. All the resources are going up into this very small elite, who can't actually do anything with them. I mean, it's nonsense, because you're as rich if you've got 200 million, you're as rich as someone with 400 million. All you're interested in after that is power, basically. So the power has become the new dynamic and raison d'être of this ruling class. It's not so much. It's not profit now. It's power, and it can only it's like it can only be the end. I think in this has to, it's like, I think the left really, and I think any kind of opposition, have to get with this idea that we're talking about power now. We're talking about the consolidation of power elites. We're talking about these fiefdoms. And you can see already, you look at America, America resisted the whole idea of this. This was not what it's supposed to be about. But that, the Trump kids, the Obama kids, the Clinton kids are going to be contesting elections, meaningless elections from now on in, basically. We have, it's like we have this kind of incredible mad concentration, and all it can, is, it doesn't seem to be the populace, the citizens, don't seem to come into the equation. We seem to be more and more superfluous. We talk about legacy humans now, and to an extent, I think they have from their point of view, and you have to, I always try and put myself in the shoes of the oppressor. The only logistical thing for them to do is to try to lower population levels drastically, because you don't want a lot of people starving, kind of unable to control themselves, and rioting in the streets. And there'll probably be, the thing is, we'll probably be slaves to our phones as we're starving to death, and that must be what. I know this is going to get into wacky conspiracy theory territory, but this is the only way that I can see this kind of unfolding, basically.
I think what you said about phones is really important, and at the nexus of a lot of what we're talking about in terms of the human response, I think, is a topic of addiction, which is something that you've written so powerfully about, Irvine. It's almost as if the more these systems fail, whether it's capitalism, techno-feudalism, the more they thrive on their failures. They find ways to profit from our disconnection. and addiction becomes almost a perfect business model.
Yes, they've put everything is about addiction, and they've put they've kind of instituted something whereby uh, our imaginations have failed and we can't see an end to it. I mean, it's it's like this is a kind of bit of a cliche now, but it's easier to predict the end to imagine the end of humanity than it is to imagine the end of capitalism now, and that's the sort of the kind of the sort of kind of the power, the hegemony, the kind of dominance that these things now have over our consciousness. It's like um, the internet used to be something, as you were saying, Yanis. It used to be something that we did. That it did stuff for us. It showed us things. It took us places. Now the internet does things to us. It's always like fill in this questionnaire, fill in this form, download this, download. You're constantly given a set of instructions, and these instructions usually are kind of originated by corporations or by the state, which is kind of owned by the corporations now anyway, which is kind of co-opted by them. So the internet now has become this kind of this tool of oppression, and it doesn't. I mean, if I remember a few weeks ago, I was trying to research insurance fraud, basically, because I wanted to write about this insurance fraud thing. And I went on and I got to one page of insurance, people trying to sell me insurance policies, 2 pages. And I got to about 500 pages, kind of 1,000 pages, 4,000 pages. There was no information on it, on kind of case studies on insurance frauds, So I just went down to the library and I just handed in my ticket to the British Library, and all these books, information came back on these insurance frauds in seconds. So it was much more efficient for me to jump on the tube from Kentish Town down to King's Cross and give my ticket to the librarian and get this information than it was to actually spend this frustrating time online. And it's a much more pleasant experience as well, So I think it has become massively oppressive, and I wish I had the courage to throw away my mobile phone, but I'm as much a prisoner of the dopamine hits as anybody else, basically, and it is very concerning to me.
Irvine, I want to show you this is my mobile phone, Irvine. I've never
Oh,
got a smartphone for exactly the reason that you're
well,
explaining.
yeah. I tell you what, I think that's the way to go is to spend time, spend an hour online on your laptop in the morning, throw away your smartphone, maybe an hour in the evening or half an hour in the evening to catch up on everything. And I think everybody, you probably, Raul, lead a lot healthier kind of emotional life than me. Your mental health is probably brilliant because of this, yeah.
Well, I think it helps. And Yanis, I just want to know what your thoughts are on this relationship between addiction, the economy, capitalism. And I think we're at a point now where most people in the population fall on this spectrum of addiction. Not necessarily substance abuse, but it might be addicted to a lot of online stuff, whether it's porn or shopping or social media. How do you see this fits in?
There's no doubt that the more technological tools those who have power have at their disposal to lure us into behavioral patterns that are in their interests, the more we will be addicted to those technological tools. It makes perfect sense. But having said that, I want to take a longer view. Controlling people, making people do things on your behalf was what politics was all about since time immemorial. From the Catholic Church, religion being the opium of the people, as Karl very accurately put it. So that's not new. And if I may go back to something Irvine said before about it sounds like a conspiracy. Well, I want to be a bit more specific about this, because the difference between us rationalist left-wingers and the Trumpists is that the Trumpists believe in a conspiracy with conspirators, that they think there are conspirators trying to pull the strings. I, as a lefty, this is my understanding of capitalism. I think this is all a conspiracy, but there are no conspirators. There is nobody pulling the strings. There's not a room in which cigar-smoking bastards decide our fate. The system, capital reproduces itself. You see, this is why I still, this day and age, declare myself to be a Marxist, because Marx equipped me with this understanding of the logic of capital. And the logic of capital is fascinating because capital is stupid, of course, right? Like artificial intelligence is stupid, doesn't understand what it does, even if it does amazing things, writes poems or paints pictures, doesn't know it's doing it, so it's stupid. But nevertheless, it is doing amazing things, and there's no conspiracy there if you understand how the mechanics work. Similarly with capital, and the strength, the power of capital comes from the fact that without realizing it, without being conscious, without being sentient, it enslaves both worker and capitalist. We know why the worker is enslaved, out of need. You have no alternative. You go down the mine, you work in the factory, you work in the Amazon warehouse, you're a Deliveroo driver. What else can you do? You need to put food on the table. That is easy to understand. But why is the capitalist also a slave? Because if you think about it, if you're a smart capitalist, the one thing that keeps you up at night is the fear of bankruptcy. Because if you go bankrupt, you will become like one of your workers. And you know what a terrible time your workers are having because you're imposing it upon them. And you know, and this is correct. You can't blame the capitalists for thinking that if they don't squeeze the living daylights out of the worker, they will go bankrupt because some other capitalists will squeeze the living daylights out of other workers. So in the end, even if they're genuinely good people who do not want to exploit others, they have to exploit others if they're capitalists, because otherwise they will stop being capitalists and they will be exploited like everybody else. So in the end, even though capital is stupid, capital is not sentient, it's not a conspirator, nevertheless, our relationship with the technology makes all of us, whether we're capitalists, workers, petit bourgeois, Deliveroo drivers, Jeff Bezos, and so on, work daily, angst-ridden, in order to reproduce the machine, to reproduce capital. So it's a conspiracy without conspirators, but that's how capitalism operated. Unlike feudalism, where it was clear that under feudalism, the lord had both the power and the money and the military strength and so on. With capitalism, nobody's responsible, and everybody's working for the machine. So instead of the machine being our slave, we are the slave of the machine, whether this is your phone or a tractor in the final analysis. And this is why it is essential that we overthrow the power of capital in order to reclaim our humanity, whether we're workers or capitalists.
So by your hypothesis, Yanis, under techno-feudalism, the ruling class kind of becomes sentient conspirators, basically, rather than kind of passive of victims of the system. Yeah,
I think so, because if you look at someone like Jeff Bezos is not like, even if you own Volkswagen, which is a huge multinational car company, right? Volkswagen is facing an extinction. Tomorrow morning it can shut down because Tesla or BYD create a technology which is far better and cheaper and so on. They have, if you're Volkswagen, you can't sleep at night. You think that your days are numbered. But if you're Jeff Bezos, your days are never numbered. Never, because everybody else is working for you. You're a techno-feudal lord. You have all these peasants out there, whether they are, owners of companies producing machines or telephones or books or whatever that are sold through Amazon.com, or whether you are just a user uploading reviews and likes and your own data to the Amazon algorithm, or you are Chris Smalls, the proletarian working in the Amazon warehouse in New Jersey. Everybody's working for Jeff Bezos. So you're absolutely right. That's why that's why I insist on not talking about capitalism anymore. And this is why I think the term techno-feudalism is important, because it alerts us to the fact that this is something new. And it is something new because cloud capitalism is a different form of capital. And as you put it, it creates in its owners a concentration of power which is sentient, which is self-driven, which is not simply a plaything of forces beyond its control. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the owners of Google and so on have a kind of authority over us that even Henry Ford and Rupert Murdoch didn't have.
But again, there's still there's still a kind of psychologically reductive and warping influence that they're subject to as individuals, because ultimately you kind of you do measure your worth in some ways by what you actually do. And these guys don't really do anything. I mean, they just sit and look at screens, and they have armies of they have armies of accountants and analysts and data analysts to make these decisions for them, and they just say yes or no, or and now they're so powerful that any outcome basically is going to operate in their favor. There's always going to be sort of there's always going to be ways in which it kind of they're always going to be able to leverage kind of the worst thing that can be told is that you can't send this rocket up to space and all this sort of stuff. But but the warping influences why when there are when there's loads of people that are kind of dying in famines and wars and kind of and all that kind of stuff, why would you kind of be interested in jumping in a rocket and flying around into space and looking for commercial opportunities in space? It's like so I think there must still be that warping drive that exists in this generation of individuals that what is Elon Musk doing? I have to keep up with him. What's Richard Branson doing? And what am I going to spend this money on? What do I do with my life, basically? Which it's like and it's like the problem with it is it loops back into this this kind of control that the algorithms have over us, and it loops us into this kind of soap opera that we're compelled to take an interest in this nonsense, sort of, and it divorces us from our own existence. And I think that's a concern with me about the technology, is that it and it uses a kind of addiction loop to divorce people from the reality of their own existence.
Completely correct. Completely correct. But let me give you let's home in for just for 1 second on Mark Zuckerberg, who started Facebook as a power trip in college, to classify different women in terms of how sexy they were. That's how it started, right? A patriarchal, cynical, lecherous drive taken onto the computer. But today, Zuckerberg has evolved. Now, I have no doubt personally, I can't prove it, but I have no doubt that he gets high on the idea that he has a machine and a set of algorithms that harvest from each one of us, from the vast majority of humanity, their character, essential elements of the character, data, information about likes, dislikes, about tendencies, about talents, about phobias, and then takes all that, sifts through certain filters, and gives this information to other conglomerates and to the United States government. Whereas somebody like Julian Assange, who does the opposite, he takes information that you should care about, that determines our life and limb, information about what our governments do in our name against humanity, and gives it to us. And somebody like Julian is dying in prison, whereas Zuckerberg is Time Magazine's Man of the Year. That gets him high.
Just going back to your comment before about Elon Musk, is there a warped method to the madness of rockets and going to space? They see the writing on the wall of what's happening with our civilization. Is it a form of either just selfish, a survival instinct, they want to find a way off this planet, or a kind of messianic impulse that we're gonna contribute to the proliferation of humanity, not by helping this planet and people on this planet, but somehow seeding a civilization in another galaxy or whatever?
The idea that that spending your life in a kind of in a dark chamber going through deep space until you die, or spending your life underground in a concrete shelter, worried about somebody maybe throwing some kind of shit down the sort of the funnel that gives you kind of your sort of filtered air or whatever. Some zombie up in the surface doing that. I mean, it's like you kind of think that this sort of instinct for survival, this kind of thing is like, what kind of survival is it we're talking about? And you loop that back into what the world that we should be trying to create for people. We should be trying to have a world that gives people opportunity to live and to express themselves, and to have that kind of freedom that we currently don't have. And it's this the technology we've created is led to this mad failure of our own imaginations, because it's completely skewed towards profit and towards the power of the concentrated power of individuals. And we go back and we look at the genesis of all this, and the genesis of neoliberalism. We made these decisions back in the 80s that we didn't really know anything about, and it's like and it's like I mean, I think probably like Milton Friedman, Thatcher's kind of, and Reagan's sort of University of Chicago kind of guy. He kind of gave the game away when he said that monopoly is a reward for efficiency. And that wasn't what kind of free market ideology was supposed to be about. And then you had the mergers and acquisitions culture of the 80s, and that was like and that kind of set up the corporations that have come to dominate. That's kind of the Hawthorns and State Streets, and we're basically just the American version of the Chinese Politburo. That's kind of sort of set up that kind of that structure now. So it's ironic that a kind of a free market libertarianism has created this kind of sort of space age Stalinism in a way. It's absolutely sort of it's when you trace these things back, it's so strange that the way that ideas never have the consequences that people intended them to have.
I'd like to step in here because I have a slightly different view. You see, I never bought the story, Evan, that neoliberalism created anything. Remember, Milton Friedman was considered to be a charlatan for most of his professional life. Nobody took him seriously. It is at some point that capitalism went through a spasm in 1971 with the Bretton Woods collapse, when Wall Street was unshackled for reasons that have nothing to do with ideology, nothing to do with economics, nothing to do with Friedman. And then the imperatives of capital accumulation after the collapse of the Bretton Woods system and the beginning of financialization, this new wave of capitalist liberation from any shackles that had been imposed upon the banking system, in particular by the New Deal, after the collapse of 1929, by the Bretton Woods system after 1944, and so on. Once all that collapsed, and politicians were being driven by bankers to liberate the politicians, right? Sorry, to liberate the bankers from any regulation and so on, they needed an ideology. They needed an ideological cover. And that's where neoliberalism comes in. Neoliberalism is neither new nor liberal nor significant. For me, it played, because you mentioned the Politburo of the Communist Party, for me, neoliberalism was as relevant to what was going on in the 1970s, 80s today, as Marxism was in the Soviet Union, in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 80s. In other words, irrelevant. I mean, in the same way that Brezhnev appealed to Marxism in order to justify whatever the hell he wanted to do, similarly, the bankers appeal to neoliberalism in order to have an ideological and mathematical cover for doing whatever they were going to do in any case. So I do not put much emphasis on neoliberalism at all, unlike the rest of the left. For me, what happened was that in 1929, capitalism almost died. Roosevelt saved it by creating a planned capitalist system. The war economy then turned this planned system into a very successful American model, which was then the basis for the post-war Bretton Woods era. That was all predicated on America having a surplus with the rest of the world. By the late 1960s, America loses the surplus and becomes a deficit country, and then it blows up the system it had created, and it needed an ideological cover for doing that, and that's neoliberalism. And suddenly, Milton Friedman became hot. He was saying the same idiocies since the 1950s, right? So what happened suddenly? It's not that suddenly he convinced people. Suddenly he became functional to the interests of the bankers and of the great industrialists.
There was one thing that Friedman said, which I think we probably can all agree on, which is that there's opportunity in crisis. Decades of preparation, neoliberal ideology in the think tanks, it meant that when the crisis hit, those ideas would seem convenient and functional. And just from our perspective, I mean, Yanis, this is one of the reasons that I was drawn to telling your story with the documentary. What happened with Syriza after the financial crisis? It's so important because it's one of these rare moments where crisis begets opportunity, and what seemed impossible suddenly becomes possible. And we didn't get the outcome we want, but as progressives, we need to learn about what went wrong so that next time we have a crisis, we can do better. So Irvine, I'd be really interested to kind of hear on kind of your thoughts on this dynamic. We've lived through what happened with Corbyn in this country. There was Sanders in the US, Syriza in Greece, and many other examples elsewhere. That inflicted an almost psychic wound on many progressives. How do we get beyond that and think about the next opportunity that's going to come down the road?
Well, I mean, it's easier to motivate people into kind of low frequency fear, sort of into that kind of dynamic. I mean, you look at Brexit, it was like, it's very, if people are struggling to make ends meet, they feel they're at the bottom of the pile, they come back home, they're not engaging with anything significant. They're not engaging with significant debate. They're very ripe for the sound bites of the Sun and, for the tabloids. And, it's like kind of, on immigration, kind of, they kind of right up now to kind of the small boats and all this nonsense. It's the low frequency fear thing. To motivate people into change is much more difficult because it asks so much more of them. When people often feel that they just don't have anything to give, they just want to get through the day and get through their lives, and it's like we all feel very depowered in the face of this kind of big, powerful, this monolithic system we're against. And it's but when you see things that are very energizing. I mean, when you go to the Scottish independence kind of marches, and we see people out in the streets, and you see people changing, and you see people realizing the possibilities of things. The Catalan independence marches in Barcelona, very similar kind of feeling and mood and atmosphere. And you think, this is all the kind of positive energies of humanity. I mean, the protests against Gaza in London, it's like, and everywhere around the world. This is kind of humanity at its best, because people are getting out and they're interacting with each other, and they're making sense of their lives are contextualized in a way where they're sort of connecting with other people. And I think this is, to me, is, I'm going back into my kind of hatred of the smartphone and the imprisonment of addiction, and I see kids that, that are growing up now, and, where I grew up, and they have nothing but addiction. There's no jobs, there's no education, there's no opportunity for them. So they're basically sitting in the house. They're watching hardcore pornography. They're playing. They're doing online gambling. They're everything. They're ordering kind of crap fast food and sort of addictive fast food full of kind of additives and sort of chemicals. So everything is set up for addiction and a kind of imprisonment, a kind of incarceration. So I think, that we have to, it's like, I think we have to get to the point where we find a way to socialize technology, to socialize this technology. Otherwise, it's going to keep it's going to keep doing its darker, nastier manifestations to the detriment of humanity.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're quite right. Especially the algorithms behind the cloud capital that regulates our conversations, like Twitter, like Facebook. These algorithms are primed to addict us to poison, to poisonous exchanges, to discontent, to anger, to hatred. And that is a new thing. There's never been a substance before that addicted us to hate one another. Cloud capital has done that. In conjunction with what you said, Ro, Milton Friedman and people like von Mises and von Hayek were charlatans during the Keynesian period of the Bretton Woods era, but they were preparing. They were not lost in some attention deficit disorder world like we are today. They were focused. They had millions and millions provided to them by bankers and by industrialists to create their think tanks, to put together their arguments and the papers, to indoctrinate PhD students and so on. And we don't, because first we don't have the money as progressives.
When you had a culture of kind of, of ideas kind of being valued, and you had you had huge sort of university departments that were devoted to education and learning for their own sake, rather than just kind of being sort of basically
we don't
being
anymore.
part of the well, they're the banks, basically. The universities are the banks. They're there to kind of they're there to get people's money. Basically, they do it through their offspring, just like it's just like the health service is now basically a care home to get people's money through their elderly parents. This is about getting people's money through their kids. And you saw things like sociology kind of be just go, basically. We don't need to understand society. You saw the rise of the MBA and sort of business orientated sort of courses, and you saw that whole kind of the sponsorship and the co-opting of university departments, and the co-opting of ideas. I mean, it's like the economics departments, to the extent that you didn't, in Britain, I mean, most of the Keynesian economists were cleaned out of the economics departments. Like, you kind of, you had all classical economists, yeah, and it's, I mean, well, there's that, there's, that whole thing about the 2008 thing, because it was, but, classical economists, had no model of crisis. Markets were supposed to be self-regulating, and so, and so that made things worse than they should have even been. There was not anybody kind of there was very kind of few, I think, dissenting voices, and it's like the one of the sad things, I think, was that although this process has happened, this has been it's been the hegemony of all these, not just the finance, but also at an ideas level. But I think a lot of people on the left, particularly the Marxist left, we've kind of said, in a way that this is great, capitalism's in crisis. Let's just sit back and watch it unfold, basically. So we haven't, I think since I noticed this, a lot of people since Orgreave and the miners' strike, people pull back. A lot of people thought, well, no, we can't change it. There is no pluralistic, social democratic future for us. We've just got to let this wrecking ball unfold. And I think retrospectively, that was a mistake, because people pulled out of the arena of debate, and they've allowed, as you said, they've allowed all these think tanks of the right to weaponize themselves and very kind of stupid, facile, rudimentary ideas. And it's almost like you see, people on the left can't be bothered arguing against it because it's almost beneath them. People feel this is too simplistic and too ridiculous. And as a result, now we have a ridiculous and simplistic society where these views and values and opinions are given this kind of level of respect. You see on mainstream news programs, you see all sorts of idiots talking all sorts of nonsense about what's going on everywhere, and they're given credence as commentators with any kind of analysis on life, basically. So I think that I've got a lot of negative feelings about the left and the kind of capitulation that so many people on the left have had from the intellectual world, and it's been partly forced on us by the dominance and the sort of the media and the universities of the right, but it's also kind of been a self-inflicted wound, basically. We've been very much lost the idea of a better humanity, of a better chance for human beings in life. And we've got into this very kind of picky, defensive sort of kind of idea about defend this, defend that, and as these things are kind of being slowly wiped away. I don't think it's about defense. I don't think it should be about defense. I think if you're on the left, you've got to be an anarchist.
There's so much there, but I know that we're running out of time. I know Yanis has other commitments he has to run off to. But I wanted to say this is a real pleasure. I wanted to thank you, Irvine, for participating, and also just for your political engagement, your courage, speaking out on Gaza and calling out the likes of Starmer for what he's doing to the Labour Party. And also just to end on a note which I think is important, which is you've spoken about the poverty of imagination and the way tech and capitalism, techno-feudalism can contribute to that. And, the opposite of that is a cultivation of imagination. I think that's central to what artists, writers, creatives are trying to do. And, you do a fantastic job with that. So if there is hope, it's going to be linked to this expansion of imagination. And I'll just say, do either of you have any final thoughts you want to, just very briefly, because I know Yanis has to go, but maybe quickly, Yanis, and then we'll go to Irvine.
Look, I just wanted to thank Irvine for all the work that he's put out there all these years, for struggling to preserve a semblance of humanism through important writings, and also your campaigns against addiction and against the manner in which the whole socioeconomic system we live in uses addiction for the purposes of essentially reinforcing the structures of power, and for the kind words you offered for my book. I need to thank you profusely for that.
Well, I mean, I should be thanking you, Yanis. You're the guy who's kept, that you've been involved on the practical side, and you've tried to work within that system. You've seen how that, you've tried to represent within that system, and you've seen how crushing and it is. So you've had experience right at the cold face of this thing we're talking about, and you've come out with a hypothesis which explains. Quite scarily explains the world that we're in. So thank you for that. And these are the tools that we need. We need as many tools as we can to understand the world that we're living in. And also, Raoul, thank you for keeping us together and sort of moving things on and shutting me up when I kind of get a bit too ranty, as I always do.
It's been a pleasure. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. But all right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. See you later, guys. Take care. Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to our channel.